Compared to last season, it seems that every time we go into a new race weekend, there's always something going on. A driver's been moved aside, this has kicked off, a driver said a no-no word in a press conference, or one team is upset at another team because they've got too many flapping appendages on their cars in a case of turbo deflection. And it has actually been in the news lately that Verstappen will continue to do the full Kimi Räikkönen in press conferences, although I'm of an age where I can remember it was Mika Häkkinen doing exactly the same thing, so it's the full Mika Häkkinen rather than the full Kimi Räikkönen, at least for me. But either way, the GPDA is apparently going to be writing a letter of how silly this whole please don't swear over the radio thing is. Although I am of the opinion that swearing on the radio is completely fine because if you put a microphone on a footballer with everything he says be nice, whereas swearing at a press conference, yeah. If you do that, even if you're taking the piss and staging a protest, then you should be given at least a fine. Heading into this weekend's United States Grand Prix, it seems to have kicked off once again with yet another controversy. Well, I mean, I say a controversy because it's hardly the crime of the century compared to other stuff I've watched over the last 30 years. But now, at least for this weekend, it's degraded into the teams basically, well, dobbing each other in. Dobbing. Telling on someone, being a grass, snitching, tattletaling, whatever you want to call it. This all came about because in recent weeks, teams have gone to the FIA to talk about a team potentially using a trick to get around Parc fermé rules after qualifying. Something you can bet your last Rolo on causing chaos online, because so many people immediately defaulted to it being McLaren, given how they managed to turn their car around earlier in the season. Whereas the other half were going, oh, it's blatantly Red Bull, isn't it? Autosport started mentioning this on Wednesday, so the 16th of October 2024, saying that their sources had revealed that the FIA had been in discussions with several teams over one team, which at the time was unidentified, using a device that allowed them to adjust the front bib clearance between qualifying and the race, and this breaks the rules regarding Parc fermé, which is a massive part of the current regulations in Formula 1 with regards to cost cutting. Parc fermé means closed parking or something along those lines. It's French, basically, because, you know, the FIA. But essentially, the rules are that during the 3 free practice sessions, you're allowed to change whatever you want on your car, right down to the dampers, anti-roll bars, suspension settings, the works. But the second that car goes out for its first lap in the first qualifying session, you can't make any changes to the car beyond adjusting the front wing flaps, or if the FIA says that you can change other things. So, you know, you've written the car off and you need to change the floor, that sort of stuff. And this is made clear within Article 40.2 of the technical regulations, which Autosport helpfully quoted for the benefit of those reading. And those regulations say that the aerodynamic setup of the front wing may be adjusted using the existing parts. No parts may be added, removed, or replaced. Article 40.9 adds, a competitor may not modify any part on the car. It must be clear from physical inspection that changes cannot be made without the use of tools. Since almost everything is bolted down on a car these days, that's going to be a very difficult rule to skirt around. And with the tolerances that these cars have to handle, it's not like Big Dave can just stand on the car to break something off. And if he did, the balance and the aero of the car would be so royally screwed, it's just not worth it. But there are some exemptions. The FIA deems the cars to be in Parc fermé between it leaving for its first qualifying laps and the start of the race. But the brakes are allowed to be bled, bodywork excluding radiators may be removed, front and rear wing assemblies may be inspected with the use of NDT methods, provided you don't take them apart. I mean, what that means, I have no clue. I think you get Neil deGrasse Tyson to have a look at it or something. You can also make cosmetic changes to the bodywork and tape can be added to, you know, reduce drag, seal up the radiators, that kind of thing. You can clean the car and you can patch up any smashed up parts of the car so long as you don't alter the geometry of it. But yesterday, Thursday the 17th of October 2024, Red Bull went, yeah, it was us. And all this concerns something called the bib, or the T-tray, the splitter, whatever you want to call it. 30 years ago, in 1994, the FIA told the teams that they had to run a plank, even though it's not actually a plank, but it's called the plank because it was briefly made of wood, along the centre line of the car. This, as most of the changes in this time, was done in response to the deaths of Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna at Imola, and also in response to the rest of the carnage that happened that year, including, but not limited to, JJ Leto injuring his spine, Martin Brundle taking Jos Verstappen's Benetton to the head, Pedro Lamy crashing in a massive manner at Silverstone in testing, Carl Wendlinger's shunt at Monaco, and also Barrichello at Imola. Basically, this plank was there because one of the bleed causes of the Senna crash was that Senna bottomed out, due to the cars being run so low to the ground. And now I say that, I know I'm about to get 997 comments about the steering column. Schumacher said at the time that he was being showered by sparks as the Williams went over the bumps at Tamburello, and Damon Hill said in his book Watching the Wheels that he was going wider through there to stop his car scraping along the ground. Now obviously the FIA didn't know this at the time because the court cases hadn't gone through yet, but this isn't a video on that particular incident, so I'm just going to move on. It meant that the teams were basically forced to raise their ride heights, and if it was too low, the plank would scrape along the ground, it would get worn, and then you'd get disqualified because you were running your car too low to the ground. Michael Schumacher and Olivier Panis found this out at the Belgian and Portuguese Grand Prix, respectively, and later on, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton would also be disqualified from a race because their planks were illegally worn. And because, at least up until recently, cars ran relatively high levels of rake, the front of the plank would usually wear more than the rear. And given that the front of the plank is where this splitter has been developed, it usually means that the splitter is pointing down at a slight angle. With the rapid expansion of underfloor aero in the ground effect era and even in the previous couple of regulation sets, the T-tray and the front of the plank has been serving more and more and more of a purpose. And the lower you can get it, the better. But there is a slight issue. And that is in qualifying the cars are running way less on fuel than they would be in the race, and since the cars can't be touched after they go out on track on Saturday afternoon for the first time, the ride height has to be set for Sunday rather than Saturday. It's not like on iRacing where you can have a dedicated qualifying setup and a race setup, because if you have a low slung setup for qualifying and then try to whack all your fuel in, you'll find that iRacing will go, this car's fail scrutineering, your ride height at the front is too low, or rear, depending on what car you're running and how you're running it. The long and short of it is, if you have a car that's set up and then you put 120 kilos of fuel in it, it's going to go down because you've got all the weight pushing down on the suspension. And then as the fuel burns off, the ride height comes back up. It's why Indy cars have weight jackers. It just makes everything a little bit safer for them. During the active suspension era of 1992 and 1993, Williams was essentially able to run the optimal ride height all the time. They could even crank down the rear ride height to reduce rake and make the car faster in a straight line. It also means that when the fuel wore off towards the end of the Grand Prix, the handling was somewhat similar to how it would have been at the start of the Grand Prix and made the car more consistent in its handling characteristics. And since the teams can't alter the ride heights anymore between qualifying and the race, and they have to basically set the car up for how it would be towards the end of a Grand Prix and not the start, finding any way of changing the height of this T-tray, splitter, whatever you want to call it, can have an effect on how things work. If you lower it, you make the airflow under the car more efficient. You can end up putting more aerodynamic weight over the front end and tuning out understeer, or you can raise it to compensate for higher fuel loads. But one thing that does need making clear, because this is something that a lot of the articles haven't been mentioning, is that this is not a full ride height adjustment. All Red Bull is accused of doing is modifying the height of the T-tray. What reason they'd have to modify it, nobody seems to be able to tell. To reduce plank wear during the race where you're going to see more wear? To maximise the airflow under the car for optimal ground effect? It seems these articles are more, oh my god, Red Bull cheating, what a surprise, said no one ever, and the back and forth between Red Bull and McLaren, as McLaren was called out and told to change their rear wing after Baku, and there's also been this thing surrounding their front wings as well. But much like the asymmetric braking systems that were outlawed earlier this season, there has been absolutely no proof whatsoever that Red Bull has been fiddling with their T-trays. It's a lot like the whole Option 13 thing. They found that this thing existed, they found that the system was there to be fiddled with, but they had absolutely no proof that Benetton had used it. And part of the reason why there's been no proof is because Red Bull claims that it is impossible to alter this thing once the car is fully assembled and ready to run. But the theory is that Red Bull was running the splitter lower in qualifying and then shifting it up for the race when there's more fuel on board and the car is running lower due to the weight. But it does explain why the Red Bull has been avoiding bumps and curbs like the plague this year. Hungaroring is the big example, as Lando and Oscar were able to curb ride the whole race while Max stayed the hell off them. But for this to be something to improve qualifying performance, I don't think so. I think this is more of a race-specific thing. But Checo admitted to Autosport that they knew this device existed, but they never used it. Checo even mentioned one sprint race weekend where they had to run with a ride height that was to the moon to avoid falling foul of the same rules that got Lewis and Charles disqualified. Max, meanwhile, wasn't even aware that the accusations had been directed against Red Bull, and he thought that they were talking about McLaren instead. So how did the other teams catch wind of this then? Hard to say, but then the engineers are a lot smarter than us and they have access to a lot of stuff that we don't. For instance, the teams now have to tell the FIA what they've changed on the cars when it comes to upgrades, and that's all made open source to a degree. Maybe somebody in another team whose job it is to go over all of this spotted something. Maybe they saw something was a bit iffy with the Red Bull later in the race, like the splitter being at the same height on the last lap as it was on the first lap, and then asking questions. Not sure. But if this splitter height adjustment was impossible when the car was assembled, it makes you wonder if indeed Red Bull was fiddling with it. But if this splitter height adjustment is impossible when the car is assembled, it makes you wonder that, if indeed Red Bull was fiddling with it, how disassembled the car had to be. What defines fully assembled? Answers on a postcard. Because you can't make changes to the car if you need a tool to make those changes, but at the same time you can remove bodywork, so maybe there was something in the cockpit or in the nose cone of the car that they could reach a hand in and fiddle with if they took the bodywork off. I don't know, I'm just quoting the technical regulations here and presenting a hypothesis. But at the same time, the car got through all the regulation checks already this season, so look, I don't know, I'm just saying what's going on here. And having gone through the original Autosport comment section, which was fun, and then the races comment section, which was also fun, and then Twitter, which was a war zone in the last few days, it's amazing how much team loyalty and driver loyalty has skewed the accusations. This one person said, "If there is such a clever device, I applaud the brains behind it. F1 should be about stretching the rules and exploring the impossible or the unlikely. These innovations are part of the colour of F1. If someone has eventually been rumbled, that is also part of the game." The response was, funny. How you guys keep repeating that Red Bull were forced to change the braking system, mind you, they were nothing but rumours, but when it's possibly another team cheating, it's clever and part of the game. I wonder what changed. Yes, we know, one is British and the other not. You really are that toxic and biased. Mate, he never said Red Bull were cheating. He actually said that it was a brilliant idea. McLaren's brake pedal, the Tyrrell and the lead shot. Brabham's rocket fuel, fan car, ride height adjustment and water-cooled brakes, the F-duct, DAS, the mass dampers, the blown diffuser, the double diffuser, mini DRS, Ferrari's fuel pulse trick, the other Ferrari 12 kilowatt from one battery and still use more from the other battery because the sensor's not looking at that battery thing. All incredibly brilliant ideas, but they're all, at least now, illegal. But some of them did seem to push the envelope a tiny bit more than others. The fuel flow thing is closer to cheating than the others simply because the rules explicitly said that trying to circumnavigate the sensors was prohibited, well, is prohibited, while the others are exploitations of grey areas or were done because it doesn't say here I can't. The MP412 brake pedal was McLaren saying to Charlie Whiting and Max Mosley, "Oh no, this is 3-wheel steering, not 4-wheel steering." It's like the no homers club. You're allowed one homer, but as soon as you get two, it's homers. It's plural. It's a no homers club, but you can have one because that's technically within the rules. But at the same time, you look at option 13 and go, that's actually pretty clever how they tried to hide it. But to go back to that previous list of, stuff, if Red Bull was indeed using this trick, it doesn't exactly fall into a grey area or pushing the boundaries. It technically falls into circumventing a rule, much like the fuel sensor trick did. They're tricks, I will still call them tricks, and they are clever, but by the letter of the rulebook, it is illegal. But it will be interesting to see what happens. Probably nothing in the grand scheme of things, and Verstappen will probably win the race just for the banter now. If the device is indeed inaccessible once the car is assembled, then it's storm in a teacup. But if they could modify that height, then that's something else entirely, and might be worth an investigation or two. There is actually a section of the rulebook, Article 3.5.5, that says that the bib, or splitter, T-tray, whatever you're calling it, and the floor must not move in relation to each other. Which is kind of what this does, if indeed they were. Still, it's not like they've tried to completely get around a turbocharger restrictor plate like those Toyota Celicas did in the WRC and still not win a single thing. I mean, even Max Mosley was impressed with the genius before he kicked them out. I still can't work out how that worked, but at the same time, if you're cheating and not winning, You're doing a shit job. So the FIA's been in discussions with Red Bull and they've basically agreed to seal off everything so it absolutely, positively cannot move. But what's a return from a 4-week break without some carnage going on online? Well, that's one way of getting things back up and running again, isn't it? I'm just amazed I've got this much material out of this one thing. It's crazy. So then, an overview of what Red Bull has been accused of doing, whether or not it's cheating, and all the other bits and pieces that usually come with this kind of thing. If this has explained some bits and pieces, then do like the video so I know I've done a good job, and if you want to take our relationship to the next level, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks, as ever, go out to the fine bunch of lads over at Patreon that continue to support me at a more personal level. And if you want to keep the lights on around here, a link to Patreon will be in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Along with affiliate links where if you buy stuff like the collections for the US Grand Prix and beyond, I get some pocket money. Or there's super thanks if you just want to top up my coffee cup, and memberships for Patreon style support without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.